So I work for the Committee to Protect Journalists, which means I travel all over the world trying to defend journalists, Syria, China, places like that. But I'd like to talk about some journalists I visited last week in the strange and isolated region of Bowtie. Here they are. I was in London for the CPJ fundraising dinner, and really the fascinating thing of the people of Bowtie is they're actually very welcoming to people from other places, as long as you dress in exactly the right national garb. Here's some people that came along with me. This is Javier from Mexico. He's suffering a DDoS attack. Here's Mansour. He's being framed in Bahrain by email coming from a single IP. That's Demrada. I think he's still okay. This is Natalia. Well, forget the rest. So why do they feel some sort of commonality and common ground with people from all around the rest of the world? Well, that's because journalism all around the rest of the world is pretty similar, and it's really easy to make a common connection between journalists. And in fact, it's even easier than that. Journalists in the relatively safe domain of Bowtie actually see people in dangerous places as more or less heroic. It's sort of the epitome of what they want to be, even if they're rarely in that sort of situation. When I moved to CPJ from EFF, I worried that that kind of sympathy would not extend to bloggers. But in fact, it turns out that when it comes to life and death situation, bloggers and journalists actually have a great deal of solidarity with one another. This is Mona El Tawhari. She's been called a blogger, she's been called a journalist, but when she was attacked last week by the Egyptian military, bloggers and journalists and everybody who'd got an opinion about Mona united in solidarity, because the broken hand is a symbol of the suppression of free speech. And of course, this, as an activist, is incredibly important for me, because making that personal connection, making you the person who identifies with the person in danger, is like 90% of the work of trying to get people motivated to act and help people. So I'm not going to talk about this sort of blurry world of citizen journalism and bloggers and journalists, because in these environments, they cohere and they're the same thing. I never have a problem with that. What I'd like to talk about is geeks and my fellow geeks. This is a fellow geek of mine. This is Chiranut Premchaporn. She's being charged for 20 years for lèse-majesté in Thailand, but the person that Chiranut is worried about, because she's a journalist, she gets a lot of attention, is this person. This is Kenny Thantawet, and he's not a journalist, so it's very hard for me to get the UN and embassies interested. He's a web designer. He's in jail for the same crime, but he made an FTP connection to a political site, and they traced him down, and they don't know what a web designer is, so they assumed that he was in charge of the whole website. This is the sign that the drug cartels left in the decapitated body of a journalist, but the journalist was not being targeted because of her journalism work. She was being targeted because she was the administrator, the system administrator of a local bulletin board. This is Anas Morawi. He's a Syrian blogger. He was arrested and detained for 10 days. He is a blogger, but actually he's a tech blogger. He's an Android developer. He's the cyanogen of Syria. This is Slim Amamou. He was one of the heroes of the Tunisian revolution, but he was arrested and detained and charged not as a journalist. He was charged with cybercrime because he's also a geek. And in fact, they charged him with being a member of the illegal party, the Pirate Party. So what's going on here? What's happening is that people are being charged and affected by being charged as being journalists, but they're also being charged for the crime of being a geek. And we don't necessarily realize this. I'm picking on Eric Schmidt, even though Google does an incredible amount of good work in this area, because Eric was wearing a bow tie. And also, he said that when asked about Google Plus in Syria, he said, well, maybe people who are in danger in Syria shouldn't use Google Plus. This is Anas Marawi, the guy who was arrested in Syria's Google Plus account. He was posting on Google Plus. You remember how hard it was to get on Google Plus in the first few days? He was posting before Eric Schmidt did. And that's because he's a geek. He got on that site, and he has more in common with Eric's colleagues at Google than anyone that Eric meets in a bow tie ever will. So this is what's happening. Geeks are being targeted simply because they're geeks in lots and lots of countries. Somebody said to me, geeks are the new intelligentsia. And that's problematic for a couple of reasons. Hacks and hackers is a funny, useful term we use to combine geekdom and journalism here. Those are two terms of opprobrium. If you're scared of either geeks or journalists in a repressive regime, you're going to turn those terms against those people, and you're going to demonize them. And unless geeks and journalists unite together to show some solidarity and turn those people into heroes that they can try to help, they're going to be in a lot of trouble. Thank you.